those of you who know, it took a lot of skill to fly and to land an ME-109 because the landing gear went up into the wings like this and then down for landing. Where the FW-190, its landing gear came down like that. It had 2 machine guns and 2 20-millimeter cannons. As the war went on and the Germans tried as much as they could to break up these bomber formations, they came up with all kinds of interesting weapons. Here's the FW-190, otherwise known as the Butcher Bird. It had a radial engine, a BMW radial engine, and it could carry a variety of weapons under the wing, including rockets, which we will talk about a little bit. Here is some pictures where you see the FW-190. It's shooting some rockets there. The ME-110, which the Germans thought that was going to do very well over England during the Battle of Britain, they ended up taking horrendous casualties. But as a defense weapon, they were able to hang what the Germans called stovepipes underneath the wings. And these were the Würfelgranat 21. They were rockets that would fire. Now, these rockets were never very accurate, and they weren't intended to actually shoot down a bomber itself. And I'll explain that in a minute. Also, you've heard of flak, the 88-millimeter gun. It was light in the mission over Regensburg. The visibility was clear. And the remaining 131 bombers, 126 of them dropped almost 300 tons of bombs on the fighter aircraft factory. And they had a very high degree of accuracy. It's something else the Germans learned about is that they would group a whole bunch of these cannons together and call it a Großbatterie, or a bunch all together. Here is, if you were wondering during the Masters of the Air series what these bomber groups were doing, it shows different squadrons in different positions. The lead squadron there, the low squadron, and then the high squadron, and you see how they were grouped there. Now, it was Air Force doctrine that they wanted you to fly as close together as possible. Of course, to have all of those 10 machine guns on the bomber to be very effective. But that is also, as you'll see, going to work against them. The Regensburg force had 146 planes. It was composed of 7 different groups, including our 100th bomb group. And Colonel Curtis LeMay led that. And in order to get to Africa, they had to put extra gas tanks in the B-17. For whatever reason, they called them Tokyo tanks. But also, it made the B-17 much more vulnerable. P-47 Thunderbolts, they called these the little friends. Now, the P-51 Mustang was not on the scene quite yet. And even with drop tanks, the P-47s could only go so far. So what would happen is they would get just about to the Belgian border. Then they would have to turn around in order to get back to England. Now, what did the Germans do? They're not going to go near those guys. So they sort of like hung back and waited until the Thunderbolts turned around and went home, and then they swooped in and started attacking the bombers. About 15 minutes after it crossed the coast, the Regensburg force encountered the first German fighter interceptions, and it continued with growing intensity all the way to the target. After 90 minutes, the German fighter force broke off the engagement because they were low on fuel and ammunition. By then, at least 15 bombers had already been shot down, seriously damaged, and 13 from a trailing formation. This is an FW-190, passes too close on your B-17. This looks like the ball turret gunner, if he leads this plane correctly, is probably going to have a kill. This is FW-190, and if you remember our start picture, that FW-190 also had a checkered nose. They were from the first squadron. They were well known for their checkered painted noses, and the pilot looks like he's ready to line up one of these bombers for a head-on pass or attack from 12 o'clock high, like I showed you with the plane. Is it a friend or a foe? at 6 o'clock low. If you're a friend, that's fine, but if you're a German coming up underneath that, that ball turret is probably going to shred you and you're going to go down. Here's some pictures from Regensburg in the curve of the beautiful blue Danube, the smoke rising. And as I said, these bombs fell very accurately, and because the factory was not located in a residential area, very few civilians were killed. The Regensburg force, they then turned south after they did their bombing raid. They went over the Alps and they were confronted by maybe a few Me-110s, but then even they had to break off and go home because they couldn't fly much further. The Regensburg force got to Africa, many of them with absolutely no gas whatsoever. B-17s that were turned away from Regensburg, some of them landed in Switzerland, and they were interned there. Colonel LeMay ordered the formation to perform 2 10-minute turns over there to hopefully allow damaged aircraft to catch up. And as I said, they eventually did land in Africa. In all, 24 bombers of the Regensburg force were lost. 24 bombers translates, ladies and gentlemen, to 240 men. This is a very heart-wrenching picture. This B-17, it's missing its port wing there and is already flipped over. There were probably no chutes that came out of there, and the crew probably did not make it out. Now on to the Schweinfurt force. It had 230 bombers comprised of 12 different groups divided into 2 task forces. As I said, Brigadier General Williams led this, and the bomb group, the Fog, had delayed their takeoff. So what happened is that, yes, a lot of the German squadrons, they intercepted the Regensburg force, but then they had time to land, refuel, rearm, attack the Schweinfurt force, and then they had time to refuel and rearm and attack the Schweinfurt force as they were leaving, going back to England. The Germans were calling down squadrons as far north as Norway and as far south as northern Italy to attack that Schweinfurt force. Losses among the 57 B-17s of the lead wing were so bad, they were thinking that the entire wing was probably going to be wiped out. However, 15 minutes from Schweinfurt, the opposing fighters, after shooting down 22 bombers already, they disengaged, landed, and refueled to rearm in order to attack the force, as I said, on their way out. This is what I wanted to explain to you about the rockets, and what I meant by they weren't meant to make actual contact. In the next slide, we'll give you a really, really good idea of how that worked. These are the Me-110s with the rockets underneath. They would fire them in the hopes of breaking the formation up. And like I said, the strategy was for the B-17s to stay as close together as possible so they could have the maximum effect of all of those machine guns. But it also worked against them because these bursts were so bad that it literally did break up the formation. And guess what? There's the German fighters down there getting ready to pick them off. Those pictures over there, those are the single-engine fighters. They would come in, and I told you about the German, whose last name was Hermann, that they would go straight for them in a head-on pass, the least protected area of the B-17F. Now here's a good picture there that you can see. You can't see the rockets very well, but here they all are being fired, the bursts like that, and as I said, they're hoping to break up that formation so they could pick off those bombers individually. At 14:57, approximately 40 B-17s remained at the lead wing when it dropped its bombs on the target area containing the factories and 30,000 workers that lived in the area. It followed a 24-minute span, and the remainder of the force, each wing found increasingly heavy smoke from the preceding bombers that dropped their bombs, and 183 bombers dropped almost 430 tons of bombs, including 125 tons of incendiary bombs. Now those are bombs that fall and they explode. They're not high explosives, they are fire bombs basically. Here's our chance to do some B-17 stories. And those of you who saw the series Masters of the Air, if you remember the character Harry Crosby, he was one of the navigators. And in his book, A Wing and a Prayer, a book that has been around forever, but I'm really sorry to say I hadn't read it until just a couple months ago, one of his stories that he tells is that they were on a bombing mission in Germany. When they were coming back, they didn't hit their target, so they had to turn around and they were going home, and that is when they were told to bomb a target of convenience. So they're flying over a German city, and of course Harry Crosby, the navigator, he knows what the cities are, and the bomb bays open up, they're ready to drop the bombs. He says, "Stop, you can't do this, you can't do this." And they're going, "What, why can't we drop our bombs?" He says, "That's Bonn, B-O-N-N, the German city Bonn." They go, "Why?" He says, "Beethoven studied there. You can't drop your bomb." And Harry said in his book that he thought that he was able to contribute to the fact that Bonn became the capital of West Germany after the war. Who knows? But another story is, you remember our ball turret gunner. I showed you that picture, the least desired position. On one of the missions, the ball turret came down and was stuck, and the door flew open. And the ball turret gunner, he's literally hanging from his straps 20, 30,000 feet above the air. Somehow they managed to pull the turret up enough that they were able to pull him out. Another story, again, if you saw the series, the CGI was good, but it might have been a little overdone in some spots. But one of the stories he also tells is of a German pilot that was flying above them that just had his plane completely riddled, nose to tail, and he fell out of the plane and was doing somersaults all the way down, and his chute never opened. Another one of the stories that he tells is, I don't quite know how this happened, but he said that on one of the missions, and this is something that the Germans would do, and I'll explain that to you. The Germans came up with a wide variety of things in order to try to stop these bombers. One of the things they would do, they would fly above the bomber formation, and they would drop bombs. And as I said, these formations are all very tightly packed. And there was one, and Heinz Nucke tells this story, actually, that there was one Messerschmitt pilot, he dropped his bomb that directly hit a B-17. It blew up the B-17, but then it took both bombers on both sides and killed those bombers. The story Crosby tells, though, is that one of these planes that dropped a bomb on the B-17, it stuck in the tail, crushing the tail gunner to death. And they flew all the way back to England with the bomb stuck, and they had to get the bomb squad to come out, and they were able to get that bomb out of there. Collisions were not uncommon. Again, that's because of the rockets going off in the formation like that. The bombers would try to avoid them, they'd split like that, and there would be mid-air collisions. This did happen. This is a picture of Schweinfurt on fire. There was a lot of civilian casualties here because these factories were mostly in residential areas, and I said there was a bunch of workers who were in the general area, and there were a lot of civilian worker casualties. The three B-17s were shot down by flak over Schweinfurt approximately 15:30. The German fighters renewed their attacks, concentrating now on any of the damaged bombers that would fall out of the formation, and then they would go after them. 8 more bombers were lost before the force reached the North Sea, where 3 more crash landed. The Schweinfurt force lost a total of 36 bombers. That's 360 men. These are all from the first bomb wing. You know what? I'm really over her messing with my slides like this. Okay, I'm sorry. I was. Oh, here's our pop quiz. Now, I forgot to tell you, I'm not looking, I'm not going to look. I forgot to tell you, if you know the answer to this, put your hand up and I'll call on you, okay? Curtis LeMay ran as a vice presidential candidate after the war, running with which presidential candidate?
Ross Perot.
No. You thought you knew, I'm sorry. Yes.
George Wallace?
George Wallace, absolutely. George Wallace. In 1968, LeMay threw his support to George Wallace and became the vice presidential candidate, running on the American Independent Party. Would you like a book or a ball bearing?
Oh, yeah.
The good thing about it, whoa. The good thing about a ball bearing is you can't destroy it. You can use that model. All right. Getting back. Well, we know what happened with George Wallace and Curtis LeMay. They didn't win, but they got 13% of the vote for a third party. That's pretty good. And that might be some indication of the condition of the country at the time. Okay, this is a B-17 that was named High Life. This was of the 100th bomb group, which was in the Masters of the Air series, that crash landed in Switzerland, and the plane and its crew were interned for the duration. Oh, here's a picture of some B-17s. Well, it's sort of like, I used to say, it's like a Timex. It takes a licking and keeps on ticking. But here are some pictures. This is